At my sister Lena's wedding, Dad held up Grandma Evelyn's brass house key and told the room that Lena was getting the house, the savings, and everything that mattered. I was 35 and standing 10 feet away. I had never seen one estate paper. Then Grandma's lawyer touched my elbow. "Audrey, don't leave yet," he said. "Your father told me you were signing tonight." I looked at Daniel Mercer, then at Dad. "Signing what?" I asked. His face changed before Dad's did. That was the first thing I noticed. The second was the slim envelope in his hand. Dad had spent weeks telling me the estate was simple. He said Lena was getting the house because that was what Grandma wanted. He also said my job was to be happy for her. Somehow, I had become part of a plan no one had bothered to explain to me. Daniel lowered his voice. "A renunciation of your trust share?" I stared at him. The band was still playing in the next room. People were clinking glasses under strings of warm lights. Lena was laughing beside her new husband. 10 minutes earlier, Dad had made me sound like the granddaughter Grandma had chosen to leave behind. Now a lawyer was telling me I apparently owned something I was expected to give up before dessert. I didn't make a scene. That would have been easy. Dad was counting on either a scene or surrender. He understood both. What he didn't understand was what happened when I stopped reacting on his schedule. I asked Daniel to give me 5 minutes. Then I went to the restroom, locked myself in a stall, and opened the Notes app on my phone. I wrote one sentence. "Do not sign anything until you know what Grandma actually did." If your family has ever decided that being capable means you should be the one who gives something up, you probably know why that sentence mattered. I wasn't trying to take Lena's wedding away from her. I wasn't trying to win Grandma's house. I wanted one thing. I wanted the truth before Dad turned his promise into my obligation. 6 weeks earlier, none of this looked like a fight. Grandma Evelyn had died in early spring. She was 82. She had lived in the same Cary ranch for decades. The place wasn't grand. It had a narrow galley kitchen, a screened porch, and a maple tree that dropped little helicopter seeds all over the driveway. To us, it was simply Grandma's house. I lived 20 minutes away in Raleigh. I was an operations manager for a regional furniture distributor. I had been with the company for 8 years, and my work was ordinary in the best way. Trucks arrived late. Customers changed orders. Warehouses ran out of the one item someone had promised by Friday. My job was to make a messy system behave without pretending the mess wasn't there. Dad liked that about me when it helped him. He called me his fixer. He said it with pride when a contractor canceled or a family dinner needed rescuing, and he said it with irritation when I asked for receipts. Dad was 62 and owned a small flooring business, and he could charm a customer into changing stain colors after installation. He could also make a request sound like a favor he had already granted you. Lena was 31. She taught art at an elementary school in Durham. She was warmer than Dad and more spontaneous than I was. She bought birthday cards 3 months early and forgot where she put them. She cried at dog food commercials. She could make a grocery store bouquet look expensive. She was also used to Dad clearing obstacles before she had to decide what they cost. I didn't resent her for that. At least I tried not to. When we were kids, Dad called Lena his sunshine and me his steady one. Sunshine got comfort. Steady got assignments, and if Lena forgot a permission slip, Dad drove it to school. If I forgot one, he said I needed to learn. That difference followed us into adulthood, only the objects changed. Grandma noticed it. She never gave speeches about favoritism. She would just hand me a dish towel and say, "You're allowed to sit down too." Then she would call Lena over and make her dry, and that was Grandma's style. She loved us both. She also had no patience for family roles that became permanent excuses. Her death came quietly into our lives through a phone call from Dad. He told me she had passed away at home. I drove to Cary before sunrise. Lena was already there. We sat on the screened porch under old blankets while Dad made coffee no one drank. No one fought. No one talked about money, and I remember thinking that grief had finally made us simple. 2 days later, Dad said Grandma's lawyer would handle the paperwork. His exact words were, "Daniel has it covered." I knew the name. Daniel Mercer had handled a few things for Grandma over the years. He had also been at her 70th birthday dinner. I had no reason to question him. I had reasons to question Dad, but I was tired and the funeral was close. The week after the funeral, Dad asked me to cover the house insurance. He said a renewal was due before the estate accounts were fully sorted. "Just float it," he told me over the phone. "I'll make sure you get it back." I asked for the bill. He said it was on Grandma's desk, and I asked who had authority over the account. There was a pause. "Daniel is handling that," Dad said. "This is just temporary." I told him I would pay an urgent bill if he sent me the invoice and written confirmation about reimbursement. He sighed like I had asked for a federal investigation. "Audrey, it's Grandma's house, not a corporate merger." I said that was exactly why I wanted the paperwork right. He didn't send the invoice. The insurance did not lapse. I learned later that the trust account had enough money for the renewal all along. At the time, I only knew Dad had asked me for money, then lost interest when I asked to see the bill, and that was the first small thing that stopped fitting. A few days later, Lena invited me to lunch, and she was deep in wedding planning by then. The wedding had been booked long before Grandma died. Lena had offered to postpone it. Dad had insisted Grandma would have hated that. I agreed with him. Grandma had already bought a blue dress for the wedding and had teased Lena about the cake tasting. Lena slid her phone across the table, and on the screen was a photo of Grandma's kitchen with pale green cabinet samples propped against the backsplash. "Dad thinks this one," she said. I looked at her. "For what?" She smiled, then hesitated. "For the house." He said I could start thinking about updates. I asked which house, though I knew. Lena blinked. "Grandma's." She said Dad had told her Grandma wanted her to have it. She said he wanted her and Josh to move in after the wedding. The way she said it made one thing obvious, and she believed this had already been decided. "Did you see the trust?" I asked. Lena shook her head. "Dad did." I asked what it said. She shrugged. "He said Daniel explained it." I told her I had never heard that. Her shoulders went up. "Maybe because you always say you don't want stuff." I had never said that. I had said I didn't want to fight over Grandma's belongings. I had said Lena could take the blue mixing bowls. I had said I didn't need the china cabinet, and somehow those sentences had become proof that I had no interest in the legal estate. Dad could turn a practical comment into a permanent position. I asked Lena one more question. "Did Dad say Grandma left the house only to you?" She nodded. Then she reached across the table. "Audrey, I don't want this to be weird." I told her neither did I meant it. She looked relieved too fast. As if my job was to confirm a decision she had already built plans around. That night I called Dad. I kept my voice even. "Lena says you told her Grandma left her the house." He said, "She did." I asked him to send me the page that said that. He laughed once. "Why?" I told him I wanted to understand what was happening. His tone cooled. "You have your own life," he said. "Lena is starting hers." I told him those were not estate terms. He said Grandma knew Lena needed a home more than I did. I asked whether Grandma had written that. Dad said, "Not everything important has to be written down." That answer stayed with me. I reminded him that he had just told me Daniel was handling written documents. Dad changed direction. He said trusts were complicated. He said Daniel would explain everything after the wedding. I asked why after. Dad said Lena had enough stress. Then he added, "You don't need to turn this into a thing." That phrase was one of Dad's favorite tools. A thing meant any problem that became visible after he had decided it should stay quiet, and if I asked for a receipt, I was making it a thing. If I said no, I was escalating, and if Lena cried, the problem was suddenly real. The rule was simple. Dad's choices were neutral. My reaction was the event. I didn't call Daniel that night. I wish I could say that was strategy. It was. It was habit. I was still trying to solve the family version before I reached for the formal one, and I told myself I would ask Dad again in person. I told myself there was probably a simple explanation. I gave him more time because that was what steady daughters did. The next Saturday, I drove to Grandma's house to pick up a box of family photos Lena wanted for the wedding memorial table. Dad said the box was in the hall closet. He said the front door would be open for a painter. When I pulled up, there was no painter. There was Lena's car and a rented cargo van. The front door was open, and inside, the living room looked like a receiving dock. Wedding gifts were stacked along one wall. There were boxes marked kitchen and bedroom in Lena's handwriting. A rolled rug leaned against Grandma's piano, and Josh was carrying in a lamp. Dad stood in the hallway with a tape measure clipped to his belt. I stopped just inside the door. "What is all this?" Lena smiled at me. "We're only storing things here until after the honeymoon." Dad added, "No reason to pay for a storage unit when the place is empty." I asked who had given permission. Dad looked at me like I had asked who had given permission for sunlight. "Lena owns it," he said. I reminded him that he still had not shown me anything proving that. Josh set down the lamp. He suddenly looked very interested in the floor, and Lena's smile disappeared. Dad told me not to embarrass her. I said I was asking a property question in a house he kept calling settled. Dad reached into his pocket and held up Grandma's brass key. It was the old one with a square head and a nick near the edge. I had seen it in Grandma's ceramic bowl for years. "This is what she wanted," he said. I almost laughed. A key was not a deed. It was not a trust. It was not even proof that Dad had permission to be there. Instead, I asked Lena how many copies existed. She said Dad had made one for her and one for Josh. Dad cut in. "They're moving in," I asked when. Lena said after the honeymoon. That was less than a month away. The estate had not even been explained to me, and Dad had already created a move-in date. I could feel the old family pressure forming around me, and it had a familiar shape. If I objected now, I was not asking for documents. I was ruining Lena's future, and Dad had moved the question from paper to furniture because furniture was harder to challenge without looking cruel. I took the photo box and left. In my car, I called Dad before I could talk myself out of it. "Please don't move anything else into that house until the ownership is clear." He said I was being dramatic. I said the request was simple. He said, "You're not in charge of this." That sentence mattered later. At the time, I believed him, and I did not know Grandma had named me successor trustee. Dad did. He had known since before she died. I would not learn that until the wedding. For the next week, I stayed out of the wedding chaos. Lena needed seating changes, not a legal fight, and I helped with place cards. I picked up ribbon from a craft store. I drove 2 boxes of centerpieces to the venue, and every time Dad mentioned the house, I changed the subject unless he was willing to show me paper. He never was. Instead, he started using other people. My Aunt Carol called and said Lena was excited about Grandma's gift. A cousin texted that it was sweet Grandma had helped the newlyweds. Dad's version of events was moving through the family faster than any legal notice. I corrected no one at first. I simply said, "I haven't seen the estate documents." That made people uncomfortable. They wanted a cleaner story. Grandma loved Lena. Lena was getting the house. Audrey was doing fine. Everyone could clap. My uncertainty sounded rude inside that version. Then Dad called me on a Tuesday morning while I was at work, and he said the house needed a new water heater before Lena moved in. He wanted me to put it on my credit card. "You'll be reimbursed," he said. I asked by whom. He said, "The estate eventually." I asked why Lena was renovating a house she had not legally received. Dad said the water heater was not a renovation. I asked why the trust or estate account could not pay. He said Daniel was still untangling things. I asked for Daniel's number. Dad went quiet. "You know what?" he said, "forget it." I told him I was happy to forget the payment, not the question. He hung up. 10 minutes later, Lena texted me a single line. "Dad says you think I'm stealing Grandma's house." I called her right away. She answered on the third ring. "Do you think that?" she asked. I said no. I told her I thought Dad was asking both of us to accept a legal conclusion neither of us had seen. She said he would never lie about Grandma. I told her I hoped he was. That was the wrong sentence, and Lena heard accusation where I meant caution. "You always do this," she said. I asked what I always did. "You make everything sound like a risk report." I almost smiled because it was annoyingly accurate. Then she added, "Can you just be my sister for 1 month?" I said, "I am your sister. That's why I'm telling you not to spend money on a house until you know it's yours." She was quiet. Then she said Dad had already booked a contractor to refinish the floors. That was his business. He was giving the labor as a wedding gift. I asked whether he was also paying for materials. She said yes. I asked whether the work had started. She said next Monday. I told her to ask him to wait. Lena snapped, "Why? So you can decide if I deserve it." That was the first time I heard Dad's framing come out of her mouth. I told her this was not about deserving anything, and she said it sure felt like it. Then she ended the call. I sat at my desk with my headset in my hand and realized Dad had achieved something important, and he had made paperwork look like an attack on my sister. That Friday, I searched the county property records online. Grandma's house was still titled in the name of the Evelyn Price Revocable Trust. That did not tell me who the beneficiaries were. It did not tell me who the successor trustee was, and it proved only one thing. Dad's claim that Lena already owned the house was not reflected in the public title. I printed the record anyway, not because it solved anything. It gave me a fact I could hold on to. The trust still owned the house, and Dad had handed out keys to trust property. He had scheduled work there. He had told relatives the transfer was complete, and none of those acts made his story true. I finally looked up Daniel Mercer's office myself. His website listed a Raleigh number. I called during my lunch break. A receptionist answered. I gave Grandma's full name and my own, and there was typing on the other end. Then the woman said Daniel was out of the office that afternoon. I asked whether I could schedule a call. She paused again. "He has a note to speak with you after the wedding," she said. I felt my shoulders tighten. "Whose note?" I asked. She said she could not discuss the file. I asked whether Daniel had personally told her not to speak with me. She said no. I left my number. I also asked her to note that I had called directly and wanted any correspondence sent to my email, not through a relative. She took the address. That was all. It was not dramatic. It was the first time I stepped around Dad instead of through him. That evening, Dad showed up at my townhouse without calling. He had a paper grocery bag in one hand, and Grandma used to bring peaches in bags like that. For 1 second, I thought he had brought something sentimental. He had not. The bag held a binder, 2 envelopes, and a bottle of wine. "I thought we should reset," he said. I let him in. The binder was wedding stuff. The binder held vendor contacts, schedules, and final payments, and Dad opened it to a page of last-minute tasks. My name was beside 3 of them. Pick up welcome bags. Confirm shuttle list. Bring Grandma's framed photo. I asked why he was giving me this. He said Lena needed help. I told him I was already helping. He nodded, then pushed an envelope toward me. Inside was a check request for the venue's overtime deposit, and he wanted me to cover it until Lena and Josh returned from the honeymoon. I looked at the amount, then at him. "Why me?" Dad leaned back. "Because you can." There it was, not because I had agreed, not because it was my expense, because I could. I slid the paper back. "No." Dad stared at me. I rarely gave one-word answers. I usually explained until my boundary sounded negotiable, and this time I did not. He asked if I was serious. I said yes. He started listing what he had paid for the wedding. Flowers, the bar, part of the venue. I told him those were choices he had made, and he said Lena would remember who showed up for her. I said, I'm showing up. I'm just not becoming the backup account. Dad's face hardened. This is what Grandma never understood about you. I went still. He had found the one person whose name could still get under my guard. I asked what Grandma supposedly never understood. He said I could turn generosity into accounting. I stood up and opened my front door. Don't use Grandma to collect money from me. Dad did not move. He looked almost surprised. Then he picked up the binder and wine. He left the check request on my table like a dare. Before he walked out, he said, this is why she knew Lena would keep the house a home. I asked him again to show me the trust. He said, after the wedding. Then he left. That night, I sent Daniel's office a short email. I wrote that Dad had made repeated statements about Grandma's trust. I wrote that I had not received any copy, and I asked Daniel to contact me directly before any document required my signature or consent. I kept it plain, no accusations, no family history. The next morning, I got an automatic confirmation from the office. Nothing else came. I told myself it was enough. I had put my request in writing. If Dad tried to use my silence as consent, there was a timestamp showing I had not given it. 2 days later, the floor work began at Grandma's house. I knew because Lena sent me a photo, and the living room was empty except for sanding equipment. She added a heart and wrote, "It already feels brighter." I stared at the picture for a long time. I could have called the police. That would have been absurd, and I could have rushed over and screamed at Dad. That would have given him exactly the conflict he wanted. Instead, I texted Lena, who authorized the work for the trust. She did not answer for an hour. When she did, her answer was Dad, so I replied that he was not the owner on the county record and asked her to wait for Daniel. Lena called immediately. She was furious. "You looked up the house?" she said. I told her yes. She said that was creepy. I said it was public information, and she said I was trying to catch Dad in something. I told her Dad was the one making claims. "I'm asking him to prove one," I said. "That's not a trap." Lena started crying, then got angry at herself for crying. She said the wedding was in less than 2 weeks, and she said she could not handle losing Grandma and fighting with me at the same time. I told her I did not want to fight either. I asked her to separate the house from the wedding. She said, "Dad says you're doing this because Grandma chose me." I closed my eyes. "Lena, I don't know what Grandma chose. That is the whole point." She went quiet. For the first time, I think she heard the difference. I asked if Dad had shown her a trust page. She said no. I asked if Daniel had spoken to her. No again. I asked whether she had signed anything, and she said she had signed a contractor approval for the flooring, using the house address as her future residence. That was a new problem. It did not make her an owner, but it did mean she was acting as if the transfer was cert. I told her not to sign anything else, and she snapped that I could not order her around. I agreed. "I'm not ordering you, I'm warning you." She asked what I thought Dad was doing. I told her I honestly did not know. Maybe he had misunderstood Grandma. Maybe there was a delay, and maybe the trust gave him authority I had not seen. But the more he refused to show paper, the less I trusted his certainty. Lena's voice softened. "He gave me Grandma's key." I said I knew. She said it felt like Grandma had handed it to her through him. That was when I understood why the key mattered, and to Lena, it was not metal. It was permission, love, and proof. Dad had chosen the perfect object. I could not take that away with a property record. I also could not let the symbol replace the document. I told her, "Keep the key for now, just don't let it answer a question it can't answer." She did not respond. Then she said she had to go. The flooring stopped the next day, and Dad told Lena the contractor had a scheduling issue. I knew his crews. They rarely had a scheduling issue when he owned the company. I suspected he had paused it after my email to Daniel. I had no proof, so I did not accuse him. Then Daniel called me. I was in a loading bay, watching a truck back toward the wrong door. I almost missed the call, and his name came up because I had saved the office number. I stepped into a quiet hallway and answered. "Ms. Price," he said, "this is Daniel Mercer." I said I had been trying to reach him. He apologized for the delay. He said he was in depositions most of the week on an unrelated matter. Then he said something odd. "I understood you wanted to wait until after Lena's wedding." I leaned against the wall. "Who told you that?" There was a pause. "Your father said the family wanted to keep estate discussions away from the wedding." I said, "My father does not speak for me." Daniel answered, "Understood." I asked for a copy of the trust. Daniel did not send it on the spot, and he said he needed to confirm the current file and his obligations before releasing documents. That sounded cautious, not evasive. He did tell me one thing. "There are matters in which your participation is required." My stomach dropped. "As a beneficiary?" I asked. He paused again. "I'd rather go through the document with you properly." I asked whether Dad had authority to promise the house to Lena. Daniel said, "I have not authorized your father to distribute trust property." That was the first answer anyone had given me, and it did not tell me what I owned. It did tell me Dad was acting beyond anything Daniel had approved. I asked Daniel to put our appointment before the wedding. He checked his calendar. The only opening was late Friday afternoon. Friday was the rehearsal dinner. I took it anyway. An hour later, Dad called. "Why are you dragging Daniel into this now?" I said Daniel was Grandma's lawyer, and Dad told me I was creating unnecessary stress. I asked how he knew about the appointment so quickly. "He called me," Dad said. Daniel later told me that was not true, and his office had called Dad only to confirm a separate logistical question about documents. Dad had guessed. He knew I would eventually go around him, and the appointment made that fear real. I told Dad I planned to hear Daniel's explanation. Dad said, "Fine, but don't go in there thinking you're entitled to something because your name appears on a page." I asked what page. He stopped talking. I repeated the question. "What page, Dad?" He said I was twisting his words. I told him I was writing them down. He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "There's the risk report," he said. Then he changed tactics, and he told me Grandma had loved Lena's dream of owning a home. He said she knew I valued independence. He said fairness was not always the same as splitting everything down the middle. All of that could have been true. None of it answered my question. I asked one last time, "Did Grandma leave me a share?" Dad said, "You don't need it." My hand tightened around the phone. He had not said no. That was the first major turn. Until then, I had been checking whether Dad's story was accurate. After that call, I started wondering whether he was trying to make a true document irrelevant before I ever saw it. By the Friday before the rehearsal dinner, I had stopped expecting Dad to volunteer anything, and I had an appointment with Daniel at 4. At 3:20, his assistant called, and a hearing in another case had run long. Daniel could meet early Saturday or Monday morning. I was due at the venue before 9 on Saturday, so I chose Monday. I hated waiting. Still, I had one useful fact. Daniel had said my participation was required. Dad had slipped and talked about my name on a page. I did not know what either meant, and I decided I would get through the wedding, then deal with the trust on Monday without a family crowd. Dad had a different plan. At the rehearsal dinner, Aunt Carol caught me near the restaurant bar. She put one hand on my arm and said, "I hope you can let tomorrow be about Lena." I asked why she thought I might not. She gave me a sad look that belonged in a much bigger tragedy. "Your dad says you're upset about the house," she said. I told her Dad had not shown me the trust. Carol exhaled. "Audrey, you have a good job. Lena has student loans. You know Grandma worried about her." I asked whether Dad had told her I was demanding the house. Carol looked away. That was answer enough. I said, "I haven't demanded anything. I don't even know what the document says." She told me sometimes peace mattered more than being technically right. I asked what I was technically right about, and she had no answer for that either. Across the room, Dad was laughing with Josh's father. He looked relaxed. He had already moved the conflict into other people's mouths. That way he could call himself the peacemaker later. I found Lena near the dessert table. "What has Dad told people?" I asked. Her face tightened. She said this was not the time. I agreed. "Then tell him to stop discussing me." She said he was only trying to prevent drama. I almost laughed. "By telling relatives I'm fighting you over a house?" Lena rubbed her forehead. "He said you were asking about your share." I asked. "What share?" She looked at me. Neither of us spoke. That was another tiny crack. Dad had apparently told Lena I wanted my share while telling me Grandma had chosen Lena, and those statements could not both be harmless shorthand. Lena saw it too. She looked past me toward Dad. "He probably means your share of the personal stuff," she said. I nodded. "Maybe." We both knew Grandma's blue bowls did not require Daniel Mercer. I did not push her. It was the night before her wedding. I told her I loved her and wanted tomorrow to be good. She hugged me hard. For a few seconds, we were sisters again instead of positions in Dad's argument. Then Dad asked me to step outside. He was waiting by the restaurant's side door with a folded sheet of paper. "I want this finished," he said. I unfolded it. The heading read Family Understanding, and the language was plain and oddly vague. It said I had no objection to Lena taking immediate possession of Grandma's house and that I supported the family's intended distribution. There was a line for my signature. There was no lawyer's name. There was no trust language, and there was no description of what I was giving up. I looked at Dad. "Did Daniel write this?" Dad said that did not matter. I said it mattered to me. He told me it was not legally binding. I asked why he needed my signature if it had no legal effect. His jaw tightened. "It shows everyone is on the same page." I said, "We are not on the same page. I haven't seen the page." Dad called that cute, and I took a photo of the paper and handed it back unsigned. He said I was humiliating Lena. I reminded him we were alone beside a loading dock. He said my attitude would reach her anyway, and I told him his paper was the only thing dragging the trust into her wedding weekend. Dad folded the sheet twice. "You know what your problem is?" he asked. I said I was sure he would tell me. "You think because you understand systems, you understand people." I told him people were the reason I was asking before signing. He stepped closer. "Lena needs that house." I said need did not create ownership. "You don't need it," he said. I told him that still did not answer what Grandma wrote. Then Dad said something I replayed later. "If you make Daniel read every technical line, you'll only hurt your sister." Not if, not maybe. He knew there were lines he did not want read aloud. I asked how much he knew. Dad said enough. I asked when Grandma had discussed the trust with him, and he looked toward the restaurant door. She talked to me about family. I asked whether Daniel had been there. Dad said no. I asked whether Grandma had told him I was a beneficiary. He snapped, "Stop cross-examining me." I wasn't a lawyer. I was his daughter. But he heard a courtroom because simple questions were finally producing answers he did not like. I put my hands in my coat pockets. "I'm not signing anything tomorrow." Dad's face went flat. "No one asked you to." I pointed at the folded paper in his hand. He said that was different. I told him Monday would settle it. Daniel would explain the trust. Then Lena and I could make decisions based on what Grandma actually wrote. Dad said, "There may not be anything left to decide by Monday." That was the second sentence that changed the shape of the weekend. I asked what he meant. He smiled without warmth. "It means let your sister have her wedding." He walked inside. I stayed by the door for a minute and listened to dishes clatter in the kitchen, and I should have been thinking about centerpieces and speeches. Instead, I was wondering what Dad believed he could accomplish in 48 hours. Saturday started at 6 in the morning. I picked up coffee, emergency sewing supplies, and the framed photo of Grandma. The venue was a restored textile mill outside Raleigh. Brick walls, tall windows, long wooden tables. Lena had chosen soft blue flowers because Grandma loved that color. For most of the morning, nothing went wrong. It was almost peaceful. Lena's dress fit. Josh remembered his vows. Dad cried when he saw her. I pinned a loose ribbon on a bouquet and found myself hoping I had imagined the worst of him. That is how family pressure works sometimes, and one normal hour can make you doubt 6 bad weeks. You think maybe the problem was your tone, and maybe you asked too many questions. Maybe everyone else is right, and you are the only person refusing to relax. Then I saw Dad talking to Daniel in the parking lot, and Daniel had not told me he was coming. He wore a dark suit and held a slim leather portfolio. Dad stood close to him, one hand on his shoulder like they were finishing a private agreement. I walked toward them. Dad saw me first. His hand dropped. Daniel smiled politely. "Audrey, I was hoping I'd catch you." I asked why he was there. He said Grandma had been a client and friend for many years. Lena had invited him months ago through Grandma's guest list. He planned to attend the ceremony and part of the reception. Then he added, "Your father mentioned we might be able to handle your paperwork afterward." I looked at Dad. "My paperwork," Dad said. "Not now." Daniel's expression changed. "I thought you and Audrey had discussed it." Dad answered too quickly. "We have," I said. "We haven't." The 3 of us stood there with wedding guests walking around us carrying gift bags and garment cases. Daniel looked from Dad to me. "Then we won't discuss it here." I said that was fine. I also said I would not sign anything that day. Daniel nodded at once. "Of course not." Dad looked annoyed by how easy that answer was. I wanted to ask Daniel what the paperwork was. He checked his watch and said the ceremony was about to start. I let it go. I had promised Lena I would not turn her wedding into a legal meeting. Monday was still there. Before we went inside, Daniel said, "I'll stay after the formal reception if you want to talk." Dad cut in. "Monday is better," I said. "I'll decide that later." It was the first time I saw real worry on Dad's face. The ceremony was beautiful. I mean that without irony. Lena looked happy. Josh looked terrified for about 30 seconds, then calmer the moment she took his hand. Dad walked her down the aisle. I cried when Grandma's photo was placed beside a small blue arrangement near the front. I did not spend the vows thinking about property. I spent them thinking about Lena at 9 years old, cutting my hair with craft scissors because she wanted to be a stylist. I thought about us sharing a room during a thunderstorm. I thought about Grandma teaching us to make biscuits and refusing to tell either of us which one looked better. That history mattered. It was why Dad's plan worked as long as it did. He knew I would absorb a lot before I risked hurting Lena. He counted my love for her as one of his assets. The reception began with dinner and speeches. My toast was short. I talked about Lena's gift for making people feel welcome, and I told Josh he was marrying someone who could turn any blank wall into a home. I never mentioned Grandma's house. Dad spoke after me. At first, his toast was exactly what you would expect, and he told a story about Lena painting the family dog's nails when she was little. He welcomed Josh. He thanked everyone for coming. Then he reached under the head table. He brought up a small blue velvet pouch. My stomach tightened before I knew why, and Dad opened it and took out Grandma's brass key. The room made that soft sound people make when they sense a sentimental moment. Lena covered her mouth. Dad smiled at her. "Your grandmother wanted you to have a home where this family could keep gathering," he said. I felt every muscle in my back go rigid. Dad held the key toward Lena. "So this is yours now." People started clapping. He waited, enjoying the timing, and then he added the part he had never said to me in public. Grandma left Lena the house, her savings, and everything that mattered in that trust. The applause got louder. Dad looked directly at me over Lena's shoulder. "And I know Audrey is proud to see her sister begin this next chapter." There it was, my consent, announced before it existed. Lena stood and hugged him. She was crying. Josh kissed her temple. Aunt Carol wiped her eyes. Nobody in that room knew that Dad had tried to get my signature the night before, and nobody knew Daniel had said my participation was required. I did not stand, I did not clap. I looked across the room at Daniel. He was not smiling. His eyes were fixed on Dad. Then he looked at the key, then at me, and he set down his water glass and stood. Dad moved on with the toast. He raised his champagne and talked about family carrying forward what mattered. The room followed him. I heard the words, but I was watching Daniel walk around the edge of the tables. He stopped beside my chair. "Audrey," he said softly, "don't leave yet." My throat went dry. "Why?" He held the slim envelope I had seen outside. "Your father told me you were signing tonight." That sentence landed harder the second time than Dad's toast. I asked the question I had asked in the cold shock of that moment. Signing what? Daniel did not answer in the middle of the reception. He looked at Dad. "A renunciation of your trust share." I stared at him. Then I looked at Lena, who was holding Grandma's key like it had just unlocked her future. Dad had not made a mistaken toast. He had built a room full of witnesses to a decision I had never made. I asked Daniel one thing. "Does Lena own the house right now?" He shook his head. "No," I asked. "Did Grandma leave it only to her?" He said no. The room seemed to tilt even though I was sitting still, and Daniel said we needed privacy. I agreed. Then I told him I wanted Lena there too. Dad had made the promise to her in public. I would not let the correction happen behind her back. We waited until the last scheduled dance before moving. I did not want a whisper chain racing through the room while Lena was still greeting guests, and Daniel found a small office near the venue kitchen. Lena came with us. Dad followed without being invited. Josh started to come too. Lena told him she needed 10 minutes, and he squeezed her hand and went back to the reception. That left 4 of us in a room with a metal desk, 2 folding chairs, and the sound of bass coming through the wall. Dad closed the door. "This is ridiculous," he said. Daniel put his portfolio on the desk. "Mark, I need you to let me explain the documents." Dad said there was nothing to explain, and Lena was still holding Grandma's key. I asked Daniel to start with one question. "What did Grandma leave?" He opened the portfolio and removed a copy of the trust. He did not wave it around. He turned to a marked section and read the structure in plain English. After expenses, Grandma's trust divided the remaining property equally between Lena and me. The house was part of the trust. So were her investment and cash accounts, and there was no clause giving the house only to Lena. There was no note saying I had enough already. Lena sat down hard in one of the folding chairs. "Half?" she asked. Daniel nodded. "Equal shares?" She looked at Dad. "You said she left me the house." Dad crossed his arms. "She wanted you to have it," Daniel said. "That is not what the trust directs." Dad snapped that legal wording did not capture every family conversation. I asked the next question. What was I supposed to sign? Daniel removed 2 draft documents, and one was a renunciation of my beneficial share. The other was a declination of the successor trustee role, and neither had my signature. Daniel explained the important part without turning it into a lecture. Grandma had written a backup rule into the trust. If one granddaughter did not take her share, that share went to the other surviving granddaughter. If I validly renounced my share, Lena would receive it under that clause. I looked at Dad. "So you knew," he said. "I knew there was a way to honor what she really wanted." I asked how he knew about the backup clause. He did not answer. Daniel did. "Your grandmother discussed the structure with Mark while she was alive. She also told him you were the successor trustee." The room went silent. I felt something colder than anger. Weeks earlier, Dad had told me I was not in charge, and he had known Grandma named me to take charge of the trust after her death. He had not misunderstood. He had reversed the truth because it made me easier to pressure. Lena looked at him. "You knew Audrey was the trustee?" Dad said. "Successor trustee. It doesn't mean she owns everything." I said, "I know that." I had not claimed otherwise. Daniel explained that a trustee had duties to the trust and beneficiaries, and the role did not give me the right to take Lena's share. It gave me responsibility to follow Grandma's instructions. That distinction mattered more than any victory speech could have. Dad seized on it. Exactly, follow what she wanted, Daniel answered. The written trust is the instruction I can confirm. Dad's face reddened. You weren't at every conversation. No, Daniel said, and neither was Audrey. That is why the document matters. He was not taking my side. He was refusing to let Dad replace a signed plan with his memory of private talks. Lena stared at the key in her palm. Did Grandma ever tell you she wanted me to have Audrey's half? Dad looked at her. His answer took too long. She knew you needed stability, he said. Lena repeated the question. Dad said Grandma worried that Audrey worked too much and did not care about the house. I almost spoke, then stopped. Lena had asked him something precise. Did she tell you to give me Audrey's half? Lena asked. Dad finally said, not in those words. Her face changed. Dad turned on me then. This is what you wanted, right? Make her feel guilty on her wedding night? I said no. He told me I could end it in 30 seconds, and all I had to do was sign the renunciation. He pointed at the draft. You don't need the money, I said. That is not the test. He said Lena had student loans and a teacher's salary. I had a management job and savings. I said none of that rewrote Grandma's trust. Dad started pacing. He talked about family. He talked about how hard it was to buy a home. He talked about how Grandma would hate to see the house sold. Some of it was emotionally true, and none of it gave him the right to promise my share. He stopped in front of me. You always land on your feet, he said. Why can't you do one generous thing without making everyone prove they deserve it? That line hurt because it contained a piece of our real history. I had landed on my feet. I had also spent years being told that every landing meant I should carry someone else next. I looked at Lena. She was crying again, but she was looking at Dad, not me. I said, this isn't about whether Lena deserves a home. Dad scoffed. I kept going. It's about whether you get to give her something that belonged to both of us. Dad said he was trying to keep the family together. I answered, you kept us together by making one daughter responsible for the other. He told me I was being dramatic. That word had lost most of its power by then, and I asked Daniel whether Dad had authority to make the promise he made in the toast. Daniel said no. Dad pointed at him, stay out of the family part. Daniel closed the trust copy. I am staying in the document part. That was enough. I picked up the draft renunciation. It was 4 pages. My name was already typed below the signature line. I read the first page. Then I set it down. No, I said. Dad stared at me. I said it again. I'm not renouncing my share. Dad's voice dropped. Think about what you're doing to your sister. Lena spoke before I could. Stop saying that. We both looked at her. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. You told me Grandma picked me. Dad said she had. Lena shook her head. No, Grandma gave us equal shares. You picked me. Dad's mouth opened. Nothing came out for a second. Lena held up the brass key. You gave me this in front of everyone like it came from her. He said the key had been Grandma's. Lena said, that's not what I mean. Her voice cracked. You made me thank you for something Audrey had to lose. I wanted to reach for her. I did not. This was her moment with him. Dad turned back to me. Fine, keep your half, but let Daniel handle the trust. Sign the declination and spare us the control act. That was the first time he said what he really feared. I asked Daniel what Grandma had written about the trustee role. He showed me the page. She had named me first, and if I declined, a local trust company would serve. Dad was not next. Lena was not next. Grandma had deliberately kept the administration outside Dad's hands. I laughed once. I could not help it. Dad glared at me. You think that means she trusted you more? I said. I think it means she made a choice. I'm done pretending her choices only count when you like them. Daniel had an acceptance form in his portfolio because the trusteeship needed to be addressed regardless of the renunciation. He explained what accepting meant. It was work, not ownership. I would have to inventory assets, pay proper expenses, keep records, and treat Lena's share exactly as carefully as mine. That sounded familiar. It sounded like responsibility without applause. For once, it had also been given to me by someone who had put it in writing. I read the acceptance. I asked Daniel 3 questions, starting with whether accepting forced me to keep the house. No, I asked whether I could give myself more than Lena. No. I asked whether I could stop unauthorized work and secure the property while the trust was administered. Yes. I signed the acceptance. Dad looked at the pen in my hand like I had pulled a fire alarm. "You are unbelievable," he said. I put the pen down. "No, I'm the trustee Grandma named." He said I was making a power grab, and I told him the power grab had been announcing someone else's property from a wedding microphone. Then I gave him the sentence I had been trying to find for 6 weeks. "Grandma didn't leave Lena my half. You promised her my signature." Nobody spoke. It was not a clever line. It was simply accurate. That was why Dad had no answer. I turned to Lena. "Your half is yours. I will protect it exactly the way I protect mine. But nobody moves into the house until Daniel and I confirm the administration steps." She nodded, slowly. I asked her for Grandma's key. That was the hardest part. Her fingers closed around it. For a second, I thought she would refuse. Then she placed it on the desk. Dad said, "That is cruel." Lena looked at him. "No, telling me it was mine was cruel." She also told him about the copies for Josh and herself. I said I would arrange to secure the house the next morning and collect every copy. Dad said his crew had materials inside. I told him Daniel and I would schedule a time for pickup. He said I could not lock him out of his mother's house, and Daniel corrected him. The trust owns the property. Dad's face went still, and there was the immediate shift I had needed to see. For 6 weeks, he had been the person with the key, the story, and the schedule, and in less than an hour, all 3 had stopped being his. I did not ask Daniel to threaten him. I did not call anyone. I did not embarrass him in front of the guests. I simply stopped treating his certainty as authority. Lena stood. "I need to go back out there." I asked if she wanted me with her. She said yes. Then she turned to Dad. "You need to stay here for a minute." Dad looked wounded. That was new. He was used to giving instructions, not receiving them. He asked if she was really taking my side. Lena said, "There shouldn't have been sides." Daniel stayed with Dad to discuss the trust materials and the contractor access. Lena and I walked back toward the reception. Before we opened the door, she stopped me. "I'm sorry," she said. I told her we did not have to solve us in a hallway. She said, "I believed him because I wanted to." I appreciated that more than an excuse. I admitted I had been angry at her sometimes. It wasn't because Grandma might leave her more. It was because she could trust Dad without checking the fine print while I was always expected to know better. Lena nodded. "That's fair." Then she gave a tired little laugh. "I hate when you sound like a risk report." I laughed too. It was the first good sound either of us had made in that office wing. We went back to the reception. No announcement was made. No correction went over the microphone. Lena danced with Josh. I helped Aunt Carol find her purse, and Dad returned 20 minutes later and sat at his table. The brass key stayed in Daniel's portfolio until I could take custody of it with the other trust items. That detail mattered. I did not carry it around like a trophy. At the end of the night, Dad tried once more, and he caught me near the exit. "You could still do the decent thing," he said. I asked him what that meant now. He said, "Give her the house." I looked at him. "You can give Lena anything that belongs to you." Then I walked away. For the first time, he had no access to mine. The next morning, I met a locksmith at Grandma's house. Lena brought her copy and Josh's. Dad did not come. Daniel had the trust file, and I had written confirmation of my role. the locksmith changed the cylinders and gave me a new set. Grandma's brass key no longer opened the door. That was not revenge, it was basic administration. The house had contractors, stored wedding gifts, and copies of old keys in circulation. I made an inventory. I photographed the rooms. Dad's flooring materials were stacked in the garage until his crew collected them with notice. Lena and Josh moved their gifts back to their apartment, and she did not make me chase her. She also canceled the kitchen samples, and we were not instantly fine, but we were honest. That was better. 2 weeks later, Daniel went through the trust with both of us at his office. We got an independent appraisal and discussed the choices. Either one of us could pursue a fair buyout if it worked, and neither of us could afford to buy the other out without taking on debt we did not want. So we chose to sell the house on the open market. That choice came from both beneficiaries, not from Dad. I handled the trustee work and shared the records with Lena, and every bill came from the trust. No one asked me to float anything again. Dad hated the sale. He sent one long email saying Grandma's home should stay in the family. I answered once. I told him the trust would be administered as written and that future trust questions needed to go through Daniel, and after that, I stopped debating. Lena had a harder conversation with him. She later told me she asked why he had done it. His answer was not a secret scheme. It was almost worse because it was so ordinary, and he believed I would be fine. He believed Lena needed more. Then he decided his belief gave him permission to rearrange Grandma's plan. Lena told him he could have asked me. Dad said I might have said no. That was the whole truth in one sentence. He did not lose his daughters forever. This was not that kind of ending. But he lost automatic access to our decisions, and Lena stopped letting him speak for her. I stopped explaining every no until he could find a weakness in it. The house sold several months later, and after expenses, the trust distributed equal shares to Lena and me, just as Grandma had directed. Lena used part of hers to pay down debt and kept the rest for a future home. I put most of mine into savings. On the final walkthrough, I found Grandma's old brass key in the small keepsake box where I had placed it after the locks changed. It was useless as a key now. I kept it anyway. Dad had held that piece of brass in front of a room full of people and tried to make it mean ownership. Grandma's actual plan had been quieter. It was paper, signatures, duties, and equal shares. For years, I thought being the steady daughter meant I should need less, ask less, and give first. I don't believe that anymore. Being capable does not make your consent optional. Lena and I still disagree about plenty. We also talk directly now. When something involves money, family, or a promise made in our names, neither of us accepts "Dad said" as proof. And if someone in your family promised away something that belonged to you because they were sure you could handle the loss, what boundary would you set first?